I work for an organization called the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. My organization is, in one sentence, is simply in charge of enforcing the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was created in 2002 after all the accounting scandals. I'm an application security manager there, and my responsibility there with my team is to ensure that whatever applications that we build or purchase are actually secure, or at least they don't present us with an unacceptable risk. And in the years that I have spent at the PCAOB doing this type of work, as well as prior to that as a security consultant, I've come across a lot of questions about security and the usability of security controls. So a couple of years ago, I started researching this topic and reading about it. And I read probably about 50 different papers and articles that talk about usability and security, a couple of books. And what I did with this, what I'm going to give you today, is really a summary of just about what I could find on usability and security. So this topic is very detailed. There's a lot of areas that you can go deeper. But I thought for the average security professional or average IT folk, this would be a good introduction into the topic. If you become interested about this, because unfortunately most IT folks are not usually interested in the usability of their systems, but if you become interested, I can provide you with references and links and articles that you can read further about. Let me just start by asking a question. Can you raise your hand if you're not directly involved in IT, technology, or security? We have no normal users. That's fine. This presentation, just for the next 45 minutes, I want you to sort of put the hat of a normal average user, not sort of set aside your knowledge, not your current job. Think of yourself as somebody else who are not very experienced with computers, who are not a computer whiz, maybe an accountant, a lawyer, a good one, a secretary, something like that. Because a lot of this, if you sort of imagine that, then a lot of this will make sense to you. Otherwise, it wouldn't if you keep in that box of, well, I know this, and I know computers, and I know security, and all that. So let me start by stating a few things. Sometimes sort of we overlook some of the things we do. Users, and I mean end users, all other users other than IT users, are really an important part of software systems. Most software systems require users to do anything. And we build software and security to serve users. Our primary objective, at least my role at the organization, to protect the assets of users and their data. So whatever we do with security when it comes to technology or software, at the end of the day, the judge of what we do is the user, and whether we succeeded in accomplishing the user's objective. So I want to do X, and I want you to do it securely. It's your job to do it as an IT professional, but it's me that would decide really whether you succeeded in fulfilling my requirements. So we really need to think about users as our customers, as our clients, as we're building these systems, as we're integrating security controls. Vulnerabilities, you probably have reached the same conclusions. We're always going to have vulnerabilities. We're always going to have problems. They're not going to go away. So we'll always have information security, application security. This is a very evolving topic. We discover new vulnerabilities all the time. So it's not something that we hope that it would subside, then we won't have to worry as much about security. Antivirus, if you follow studies that actually measure the effectiveness of antivirus, the best one I think was like 70% effectiveness of catching all the viruses that were thrown at it. So from a user perspective, you ask users about security, most of the time they associate security with antivirus. So when you think, do you think you have enough security on your computer? If they know they have antivirus on their computer, then they would say to you, yes. But even if they do, that doesn't mean they're covered. So there are many other problems, of course, in security, many other vulnerabilities. They're not viruses or worms. Now, I'm going to try to convince you with two things today. And we'll see at the end of the day if you're convinced. The first one is that the current usability situation is really bad. So if you look at the history of security, if you look at the current technologies, and you ask the users, and you look at all the surveys and the experiments and the discussions by scientists, researchers, and so on, you would see there's really a negative view of security and usability in general. You may have experienced this. People complain about security all the time. Security is viewed as an obstacle to what users really want to do. The second point I'm going to try to convince you with is that bad usability is also bad security. So they are interrelated. If you don't do a good job with your usability, you're taken away from your security. So they're tied together. That's why it is so important. And the last point I want to make on this slide is that, and this is something that we all experience. A lot of things work really well in theory. Technically, they're sound, they work fantastically, but in reality, they don't work. There's so many examples. There are a lot of failures, security protocols, technology, and so on. But what's the most common authentication mechanism? Password, right? We all complain about passwords not being good because they're vulnerable to different types of attacks. So the next step is to have two-factor authentication, or PKI, maybe have every user, which probably most of you do with your corporate account, have a secure ID. But if you think about the end user and the different applications that user has to access, not just the corporate environment, but the outside world, the credit card companies, the banking companies, their shopping accounts. If you try to do the two-factor authentications, it fails very quickly because you would have to carry a secure ID for each account, right? And that's not practical. So passwords are better. And passwords actually scale better than secure IDs in a different way because you can use the same password for all accounts, right? The average user has 18 different passwords to remember. If you have a secure ID, you won't be able, even if you agree to carry all of them, you'd want at least a couple of them to cover a couple of accounts. That doesn't work very well. So in theory, yes, two-factor authentication works better, but in reality, it may not be the case. And that's true for other security technologies because they don't work in vacuum. You always have to consider the environment and the user. Okay, so instead of going through all the studies and the statistics and the surveys, I thought I'd just summarize what's the user's view on usability. And the majority of users sort of rate usability as a failure, especially when it comes to security. So that's really the bottom line from a user's perspective. And I thought I would find something to sort of solidify all the feedback that I've read about